I believe in God, the being of God proved from the frame of human nature. Sermon 7 of Sermons on the Apostles' Creed by Isaac Barrow. Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him." End quote. The belief of God's existence is the foundation of all religion. If which be not well laid in our minds by convincing reasons, the superstructures standing thereon may easily be in danger of being shaken and ruined, especially being assailed by the winds of temptation and opposition, which everywhere blow so violently in this irreligious age. No discourses, therefore, can perhaps be more needful or seasonably useful than such as do produce and urge reasons of that kind, apt to establish that foundation. Of such there be, I conceive, none better or more suitable to common capacity than those which are drawn from effects apparent to men's general observation and experience, the which cannot reasonably be ascribed to any other cause than unto God, that is, according to the notion commonly answering to that name, to a being incomprehensibly wise, powerful, and good. Of such effects there be innumerably many in this sensible world among things natural, more strictly so called, that is, subsisting and acting without immediate use of understanding or choice, the constitutions and operations of which, being evidently directed according to very much reason and to very good purpose, to evince their being framed and ordered by such a being, as I have formerly, with a competent largeness, endeavoured to show. But besides those, there is exposed to our observation, yea, subject to our inward conscience, another sort of beings, acting in another manner, and from other principles, having in them a spring of voluntary motion and activity, not, as the rest, necessarily determined, or driven on, by a kind of blind violence, in one direct road to one certain end, but guiding themselves with judgment and choice, by several ways, toward diverse ends, briefly, endued with reason, to know what and why, and with liberty, to choose what and how they should act, and that this sort of beings, that is, we ourselves, all mankind, did proceed from the same source or original cause, as it is in way of history delivered and affirmed in our text, so I shall now endeavour by reason, apt to persuade even those who would not allow this sacred authority, to show. Indeed, if the quote, eternal power and divinity of God may, quote, as St. Paul tells us, quote, be seen in all the works of God, quote, the same peculiarly and principally will appear observable in this masterpiece, as it were, of the great artificer. If the meanest creatures reflect somewhat of light, by which we may discern the divine existence and perfections, in this fine and best polished mirror we shall more clearly discover the same. Nowhere so much of God will appear as in this work, which was designedly formed to resemble and represent him. This, then, is the subject of our present discourse, that in man, well considered, we may discern manifest footsteps of that incomprehensibly excellent being impressed upon him, and this doubly, both in each man singly, and in men as standing in conjunction or relation to each other. Considering man's nature, we shall have reason to think it to have proceeded from God. Considering human societies, we shall see cause to suppose them designed and governed by God. 1. Consider we first any one single man, or that human nature abstractedly, whereof each individual person doth partake, and whereas that doth consist of two parts, one material and external, whereby man becomes a sensible part of nature, and hath an eminent station among visible creatures, the other, that interior and invisible principle of operations peculiarly called human. As to the former, we did, among other such parts of nature, take cognizance thereof, and even in that discovered plain marks of a great wisdom that made it, of a great goodness taking care to maintain it. The other now we shall chiefly consider, of which we may discern not only large tracks, but express footsteps of the divine existence and efficiency, not only such signs as smoke is of fire, or a picture of the painter that drew it, but even such as the spark is of fire, and the picture of its original. 1. And, first, that man's nature did proceed from some efficient cause, it will, as of other things of nature, be reasonable to suppose. For if not so, then it must either spring up of itself, so that at some determinate beginning of time, or from all eternity, some one man, or some number of men, did of themselves exist, or there hath been a succession, without beginning, of continual generations indeterminate, not terminated in any root, one or more of singular persons. Now, generally, that man did not at any time in any manner spring up of himself appears, 1. From history and common tradition, which, as we shall otherwhere largely show, deliver the contrary, being therein more credible than bare conjecture or precarious assertion, destitute of testimony or proof. 2. From the present constant manner of man's production, which is not by spontaneous emergency, but in way of successive derivation, according to a method admirably provided for by nature. 3. Because if ever man did spring up of himself, it should be reasonable that at any time, that often, that at least some time, in so long a course of times, the like should happen, which yet no experience doth attest. 4. There is an evident relation between our bodies and souls, the members and organs of our bodies being wonderfully adapted to serve the operations of our souls. Now, in our bodies, as we have before showed, there appeared plain arguments of a most wise author that contrived and framed them. Therefore, in no likelihood did our souls arise of themselves, but owe their being to the same wise cause. Also particularly, that not any men did at some beginning of time spring up of themselves is evident, because there is even in the thing itself a repugnance, and it is altogether unconceivable that anything, which once hath not been, should ever come to be, without receiving its being from another. And supposing such a rise of anything, there could not in any case be any need of an efficient cause, since anything might purely out of nothing come to be of itself. Neither could any man so exist from eternity, both from the general reasons assigned, which, being grounded in the nature of the thing, and including no respect to this circumstance of now and then, do equally remove this supposition, for what is in itself unapt or unnecessary or improbable to be now, was always alike so, the being from eternity or in time not altering the nature of the thing, and also particularly because there are no footsteps or monuments of man's, not to say eternal, but even ancient, standing in the world, but rather many good arguments, otherwhere touched, of his late coming thereinto, which consideration did even convince Epicurus and his followers, and made them acknowledge man to be a novel production. I add, seeing it is necessary to suppose some eternal and self-subsistent being distinct from man, and from any other particular sensible being, for there is no such being which in reason can be supposed author of the rest, but rather all of them bear characters signifying their original from a being more excellent than themselves, and such an one being admitted, there is no need or reason to suppose any other, especially man and all others appearing unapt so to subsist. Therefore it is not reasonable to ascribe eternal self-subsistence to man. This discourse I confirm with the suffrage of Aristotle himself, who in his Physics hath these words, quote, "In natural things, that which is definite and better, if possible, must rather exist. But it suffices that one, the first of things immovable, being eternal, should be to others the original of motion." End quote. I subjoin, and by parity of reason it is sufficient, that one and the best thing be eternally subsistent of itself, and the cause of subsistence to the rest. As for the last supposition, that there have been indeterminate successions of men without beginning, it is also liable to most of the former exceptions, beside that it is altogether unintelligible, and its having this peculiar difficulty in it, that it ascribes determinate effects to causes indeterminate. And indeed it hath been to no other purpose introduced than to evade the arguments arising from the nature of the thing, by confounding the matter with impertinent intrigues, such as the terms of infinite and indeterminate must necessarily produce in man's shallow understanding. I therefore, upon such grounds, assume it as a reasonable supposition that man's nature hath proceeded from some cause. 2. I adjoin, secondly, that it could not come from any sensible or material cause, nor from any complication of such causes, for that the properties, the powers, the operations of man's soul are wholly different from in kind, highly elevated in worth, above all the properties, powers, and operations of things corporeal, in what imaginable manner soever framed or tempered. The properties, faculties, and operations of our souls are, or refer to, several sorts or ways of knowledge, sense, fancy, memory, discourse, mental intention, that is, of appetite toward and choice of good, or of disliking and refusing evil, of passion, that is, of sensible complacency or displeasure in respect to good and evil apprehended under several notions and circumstances, of self-moving, the power and act of moving without any force extrinsical working upon it. The general properties of things corporeal are extension according to several dimensions and figures, aptness to receive motion from, or to impart motion unto, each other in several degrees and properties of velocity, to divide and unite, or to be divided and united each by other, and the like, coherent with and resulting from these. Now, to common sense it seems evident that those properties and these are toto genera different from each other, nor have any conceivable similitude unto, connection with, dependence upon each other, as to their immediate nature. Let any part of this corporeal mass be refined by the subtlest division, let it be agitated by the quickest motion, let it be modelled into what shape or fashion you please, how can any man imagine either knowledge or appetite or passion thence to result, or that it should thence acquire a power of moving itself or another adjacent body? Even, I say, this inferior locomotive faculty is too high for matter, by any change it can undergo, to obtain, for we, as inward experience or conscience of what we do may teach us, determine ourselves commonly to action, and move the corporeal instruments subject to our will and command, not by force of any precedent bodily impression or impulse, but either according to mere pleasure, or in virtue of somewhat spiritual and abstracted from matter, acting upon us, not by a physical energy, but by a moral representation, in a manner more easily conceived than expressed. For no man surely is so dull that he cannot perceive a huge difference between being dragged by a violent hand and drawn to action by a strong reason, although it may puzzle him to express that difference. Such a proposition of truth, such an apprehension of events possible, such an appearance of good or evil consequent, things nowhere existent without us, nor having in them anything of corporeal subsistence, nor therefore capable of corporeal operation, are all the engines that usually impel us to action, and these, by a voluntary application of our minds, by collecting and digesting, severing and rejecting, sifting and moulding the present single representations of things, by an immediate interior power, independent from anything without us, we frame within ourselves. And even such a self-moving or self-determining power we cannot anywise conceive to be in, or to arise from, any part of this corporeal mass, however shaped or sized, however situated or agitated. Much less can we well apprehend the more noble faculties to be seated in or to spring from it. Of them the grossest and the finest, the slowest and the nimblest, the roughest and the smoothest bodies are alike capable, or rather unlike uncapable. To think a gross body may be ground and pounded into rationality, a slow body may be thumped and driven into passion, a rough body may be filed and polished into a faculty of discerning and resenting things, that a cluster of pretty thin round atoms, as Democritus forsooth conceited, that a well-mixed combination of elements, as Empedocles fancied, that a harmonious contemperation, or crasis, of humours, as Galen, dreaming, it seems, upon his drugs and his potions, would persuade us, that an implement made up of I know not what fine springs and wheels and such mechanistic knacks, as some of our modern wizards have been busy in divining, should, without more to do, become the subject of so rare capacities and endowments, the author of actions so worthy, and works so wonderful, capable of wisdom and virtue, of knowledge so vast, and of desires so lofty, apt to contemplate truth and effect good, able to recollect things past, and to foresee things future, to search so deep into the causes of things, and disclose so many mysteries of nature, to invent so many arts and sciences, to contrive such projects of policy, and achieve such feats of prowess, briefly, should become capable to design, undertake, and perform all those admirable effects of human wit and industry which we daily see and hear of, how senseless and absurd conceits are these! How can we, without great indignation and regret, entertain such suppositions? No, no, it is both ridiculous fondness and monstrous baseness for us to own any parentage from, or any alliance to, things so mean, so very much below us. It is indeed observable that no man can well, or scarce any man hath disowned the receiving his being from God, but hath also in a manner disowned his own being what he is, that no man denying God hath not also withal denied himself to be a man, renounced his reason, his liberty, and other perfections of his nature, rather than acknowledge himself so well descended, hath been ready to confess himself no more than a beast, yea, much less than probably beasts are, a mere corporeal machine, a ball of fate and chance, a thing violently tossed and tumbled up and down by bodies all about it. But let these degenerate men vilify their own nature, and disparage themselves as they please, yet those noble perfections of our soul speak its extraction from a higher stock. We cannot, if we consider them well, but acknowledge, as Epicharmus said of old, that, quote, man's reason did sprout from the divine reason, end quote. They plainly discover their original to be from a cause itself understanding and knowing, willing freely, resenting things, if I may so speak, and moving of itself in a more excellent manner and degree. And indeed it is very considerable to our purpose, that while we assert the existence of God, we assert no other thing to be than such as whereof we can assign a manifest instance or example, as it were, although in degree much inferior. For what can in any degree exist, it is not hard to conceive that possible to exist in any degree, how high soever. What is in kind possible, is in any perfection of degree possible. Yea, what we see in a lower degree somewhere to exist, doth probably otherwhere exist in higher perfection. There is therefore scarce any attribute commonly ascribed to God, the existence whereof we cannot show possible, yea, very credible, by showing some degree, I use this word in a large and popular sense, not regarding scholastical nicety, some participation, some semblance, or, if you please, some shadow thereof discernible in man, he being indeed a small picture, as it were, wherein God hath drawn and represented himself, giving us to read that of himself in this small volume, which, in its proper character and size, we could never be able to apprehend, each letter, each line of his excellency being in itself too large for our eye perfectly to view and comprehend. 3. We are, I say, not only God's works, but his children, our souls bearing in their countenance and complexion diverse express features of him, especially as at first they were made, and as by improvement of our capacities they may again become. In the substance of man's soul, in its union with things corporeal, in its properties and powers, we may observe diverse such resemblances, declaring it in a manner to be what Seneca did say of it, quote, a little God harboured in human body, end quote. For as God, quote, inhabiting light inaccessible, end quote, being himself invisible and subject to no sense, discovers himself by manifold effects of wisdom and power, so doth our soul, itself immediately exposed to no sense, show itself by many works of art and industry, wherein she imitates nature and the works of God, although her works in fineness and greatness do indeed come infinitely short of his. As God by his presence and influence doth, as the philosopher speaks, quote, contain and keep together the whole frame of things, end quote, so that he withdrawing them, it would fall of itself into corruption and ruin, so doth the soul, by its union and secret energy upon the body, connect the parts of its body, and preserve it from dissolution, which presently, they being removed, doth follow. As he, in a manner beyond our conception, without any proper extension or composition of parts, doth coexist with, penetrateth, and passeth through all things, so is she, in a manner also unconceivable, everywhere present within her bounds, and penetrates all the dimensions of her little world. As he incomprehensibly, by a word of his mind, or by a mere act of will, doth move the whole frame or any part of nature, so doth she, we cannot tell how, by thinking only and by willing, wield her body, and determine any member whereof to motion. As he, not confined by the extension or duration of things, doth at one simple view behold all things, not only present, but past and future, yea, whenever, wherever, however possible, so doth she, making wide excursions out of her narrow mansion, in an instant, as it were, or, with a marvellous agility, transcend any fixed bounds of time or place, surveys in her thoughts the most remote regions, stopping nowhere, and passing over the world's bounds into spaces void and imaginary, reviews ages long since past, and looks forward into those long after to come, sees things in their causes, and, as it were, beyond them, even the possibilities of things that never shall be. As he performs nothing rashly or vainly, but always with wisest design to the best end, so doth she never set herself on action without some drift, or aim, at good apparent to her. As he, among all the agitations and changes of things without him, abides himself immovable, impassible, and immutable, so is she, immediately at least, not disturbed, not altered, not affected by the various motions that surround her. They do not touch her, they cannot stir her. Among the many tumults and tempests blustering all about her, she can retain a steady calm and rest. Aristotle himself concluded her to be unmovable, impassible, unmixed, and uncompounded. So fair characters are there of the divine nature engraven upon man's soul. But one chief property thereof we have not as yet touched, whereof, alas, the lineaments are more faint and less discernible, they being in themselves originally most tender and delicate, and thence apt by our unhappy degeneration to suffer the most, and have thence accordingly been most defaced, goodness, I mean, whereof yet, I shall not doubt to say, many goodly relics are extant, and may be observed therein. There do remain, dispersed in the soil of human nature, diverse seeds of goodness, of benignity, of ingenuity, which, being cherished, excited, and quickened by good culture, do, to common experience, thrust out flowers very lovely, yield fruits very pleasant of virtue and goodness. We see that even the generality of men are prone to approve the laws and rules directing to justice, sincerity, and beneficence, to commend actions suitable unto them, to honour persons practising according to them, as also to distaste, detest, or despise such men whose principles or tempers incline them to the practice of injury, fraud, malice, and cruelty. Yea, even them men generally are apt to dislike, who are so addicted to themselves as to be backward to do good to others. Yea, no man can act according to those rules of justice and goodness without satisfaction of mind. No man can do against them without inward self-condemnation and regret, as St. Paul did observe for us. No man hardly is so savage, in whom the receiving kindnesses doth not beget a kindly sense, and an inclination, eo nomine, for that cause barely, to return the like, which inclination cannot well be ascribed to any other principle than somewhat of ingenuity innate to man. All men, I suppose, feel in themselves, if at least not hardened by villainous custom, a disposition prompting them to commiserate, yea, even with some trouble and some damage to themselves, to succour and relieve them who are in want, pain, or any distress, even mere strangers, and such from whom they can expect no return of benefit or advantage to themselves. Many examples occur, in experience and in history, of men who, from dictates of common reason and natural inclinations, which in this case are not to be separated, both arising from the same source of human nature, have been very apt freely and liberally to impart unto others somewhat of any good thing they possessed, to sacrifice their own ease, pleasure, profit, unto others' benefit, to undergo great pains and hazards for public good, the good of their family, of their friends, of their country, of mankind in general, and all this without any hope of recompense, except perhaps that commonly they might have some regard to the approbation and acceptance, to the goodwill and gratitude of them whom their beneficence obliged, which in real esteem is no great derogation to their noble performances, and argues only there is, together with such a laudable benignity or goodness of nature, to excite and enliven it, implanted a natural ambition also, or generosity in man's soul, which, being well moderated, seems not culpable, since God himself, in return to his most free beneficence, doth expect and require somewhat of thanks and praise, so much as we are able to render to him. Yea, although our adversaries will scarce admit so much, for that not supposing any good original, they are unwilling to allow any good derivative, they are as ready to exclude all humanity as divinity, they have commonly, as no opinion of God, so no good opinion of men, feeling little good in themselves, they are willing to think less to be in others, so projecting to excuse themselves, and shroud their own particular faults under the covert of a general naughtiness. I doubt not to say there have been many persons in all ages full of very single and sincere goodwill toward men, heartily desiring the public good, and compassionating the evils of mankind, ready with their best endeavours to procure and promote the one, to prevent and remove the other, from principles of mere ingenuity or pure nobleness, that with unmovable resolution have persisted in courses tending to such ends, although in them they have encountered dangers, disgraces, and troubles from the ingrateful world, or rather from some men prevalent therein, their envy or spite. In fine, the wisest observers of man's nature have pronounced him to be a creature gentle and sociable, inclinable to and fit for conversation, apt to keep good order, to observe rules of justice, to embrace any sort of virtue, if well managed, if instructed by good discipline, if guided by good example, if living under the influence of wise laws and virtuous governance. Fierceness, rudeness, craft, malice, all perverse and intractable, all mischievous and vicious dispositions, do grow among men, like weeds in any, even the best, soil, and overspread the earth, from neglect of good education, from ill conduct, ill custom, ill example. It is the comparison of St. Chrysostom and of Plutarch. It is favour, therefore, I conceive, to their own habitual deprivations of nature, or perhaps to some prejudicate opinions, which hath induced some men to make so disadvantageous a portraiture of human nature, in which nothing lightsome or handsome, no lines of candour or rectitude do appear, but all seems black and crooked, all is drawn over with dusky shades, and irregular features of base designfulness and malicious cunning, of suspicion, malignity, rapacity, which character, were it true, in that general extent, and not proper only to some monsters among men, we need not further seek for hell, since as many men, so many fiends appear unto us. But so commodious living here, so many offices daily performed among men of courtesy, mercy, and pity, so many constant observances of friendship and amity, so many instances of fidelity and gratitude, so much credit always, even among pagans and barbarians, preserved to justice and humanity, Humanity, that very name doth fairly argue for us, do sufficiently confute those defamers and slanderers of mankind, do competently evidence that all good inclinations are not quite banished the world, nor quite razed out of man's soul, but that even herein human nature doth somewhat resemble its excellent original, the nature divine. Thus doth man's nature in its substance, as it were, its faculties, its manner of operation, resemble God. But we may further observe that as children are indeed in complexion and feature usually born somewhat like to their parents, but grow daily more like unto them, those smaller lineaments continually with their bulk and stature increasing and becoming more discernible, so is man improvable to more exact resemblances of God. His soul hath appetites and capacities, by which, well guided and ordered, it soars and climbs continually in its affection and desire toward divine perfection. Man hath an insatiable curiosity and greediness of knowledge. Quote, his eye is never satisfied with seeing, nor his ear filled with hearing. He never rests content with, but in a manner despises the notions already acquired, always striving to enlarge and enrich his mind with intellectual treasure. So doth he tend nearer to divine omniscience. And as his searches after truth, so his desires of good are in a manner boundless. No present, no definite good can long detain his liking, or fully content him. He soon doth suck it dry, and leaves it insipid, then longs and hunts after fresh entertainments. He seems poor to himself in the greatest plenty, and straitened in the most ample condition. In short, he ever aspires to somewhat more great and high than what he enjoys, finding in himself a kind of infinite, at least indefinite, ambition and covetousness, a restless tendency after further degrees of joy and happiness. So doth he shoot himself on toward that highest mark of divine felicity. Being sensible of his own mortal and transitory condition, he yet seeks to live for ever in his name and memory, labours to perform memorable actions, rears lasting monuments of his art and knowledge, of his wealth and power, of his bounty and munificence, by all means studying and striving to commend himself to the regard of posterity. Thus affects he another sort of likeness unto God, even a kind of immortality and eternity. If also, being through divine grace awakened out of that drowsy state, which naturally in great measure hath seized upon all men, he discovereth his moral or spiritual wants and imperfections, he is then apt to breathe and endeavour a nearer similitude to God, even in goodness, righteousness, and purity, to labour in getting continually his inclinations more rectified, and his passions better composed, in restraining, subduing, destroying inordinate self-love, with the sensuality, the perverseness, the pride, the malice, growing from that evil root, in promoting all virtuous desires and affections, especially reverence toward God his Father, and charity toward man his brother. Neither then can he be at ease or well content, till he arrive in such dispositions of mind to that nearness of perfection which his capacities do admit. And a man thus qualified in degree, thus tending in desire toward higher perfection in goodness, is indeed the most lively image that can be framed of God, being, as St. Paul expresseth it, quote, renewed to an acknowledgement, end quote, or better understanding of himself, of his Maker, of true goodness, quote, according to the image of him that made him, end quote. I might also propound to your consideration that, quote, natural proclivity observable in men to acknowledge and worship God, end quote, to embrace religion both in opinion and practice, and especially on all occasions of need or distress to have recourse unto him, as an argument of his relation to God. It is, we see, common in nature for all creatures to be readily acquainted with their parents, to run after them, to expect from them supply of wants, succour in straits, refuge and defence in dangers. From hence we may easily discern to what parent any child belongs. And since there appears the like instinct and capacity innate to man, and indeed to him alone, whence some philosophers thought good from this property to define man a creature capable of religion, since he is apt to entertain notions of God, to bear in his mind and awe a respect toward him, since he is ready in all his straits, when other helps and hopes fail him, to lift up his heart and voice toward heaven for assistance, why may we not in like manner hence discern, and with like reason infer, that man is also in a special manner God's child and offspring? I might also adjoin that the very power of framing conceptions, although imperfect and inadequate, concerning God, is in itself a faculty so very spiritual and sublime that it argues something divine in man's soul. That like is known by its like, was an axiom among ancient philosophers, and that, spiritual things are spiritually discerned, is the rule of a better master in wisdom than they. And beasts, surely, because not endued with reason, have no conceptions concerning man's nature or the matters proper to him, according to what rules, by what methods, to what purposes he doth act. So, in likelihood, should we not be able to apprehend and discourse about things appertaining to God, his nature, the methods and reasons of his proceedings, the notions of eternal truth, the indispensable laws of right, the natural differences of good and evil, with such like high objects of thought, except our souls had in them some sparks of divine understanding, some cognation with, and communication from, heaven. I shall to these only subjoin one further consideration worth attending to, that the wisest and most considerate men, in several times, only by reflecting upon their own minds, and observing in them what was most lovely and excellent, most pure and straight, have fallen upon, and conspired in, notions concerning God, very suitable to those which we believe taught us by revelation, although contrary to the prejudices of their education, and to popular conceits. Many admirable passages to this purpose we may find dropped from the mouth of Socrates and the pen of Plato, in Cicero, in Epictetus, yea, in the least credulous or fanciful of men, Aristotle himself, whence plainly enough we may collect how near affinity there is between God and us, how legible characters of the divinity are written upon our souls, how easily we may know God, if we be not ignorant of ourselves, that we need not go far to fetch arguments to prove that God is, nor to find lessons to learn what he is, since we always carry both about us, or rather within us, since our souls could indeed come from no other than such a being whom they so resemble and represent. I have indulged my thoughts somewhat freely in this speculation, yet I hope not altogether impertinently, for that, as I before alleged, in the chief of God's works, observable by us, we may reasonably suppose that his glory doth chiefly shine, and will therefore be most discernible to us, if we open our eyes and apply our minds thereto. 2. Thus doth human nature, being in each singular man, show the existence of God, as its original author and pattern, considering also men as related and combined together in society, some glimpse of a divine power and wisdom ordering them toward it, and preserving them in it, may be perceived, as in the world natural, the parts thereof are so fitted in varieties of size, of quality, of aptitude to motion, that all may stick together, excluding chasms and vacuities, and all cooperate incessantly to the preservation of that common union and harmony which was there intended. So in the world political we may observe various propensions and aptitudes disposing men to collection and coherence and cooperation in society. They are apt to flock together, not only from a kind of necessity, discovered by reason, for mutual help and defence, but from a natural love to company and conversation, with an aptness to delight therein, and from an inbred aversion to that solitude, wherein many great appetites natural to man must needs be stifled. They are also marvellously fitted to maintain intercourse, not only to the principal guide thereof, reason, but by that great instrument of it, speech, whereby men impart, and as it were transfuse into one another, their inmost thoughts, which faculty doth evidently relate unto, and plainly shows men naturally designed for, society. In order thereto, men are also endued with several subordinate inclinations and qualifications, arising from different temper of body, or disposition of mind, requisite to cement society, and preserve it for a competent durance in peace and order, some few being made very sagacious and provident, and thence fit to direct others, very quick and active, thence able to execute, others of a high spirit and courage, thence affecting and disposed to command, most others being dull in conceit, or heavy of temper, or of a soft spirit, and thence apt to follow, content to rest in mean state, willing to obey, all these things being so ordered that even contrarieties of humour in men do serve to settle them in their due place and posture, to beget and preserve a peaceful union, and a decent harmony of action in society, which, supposing all men in ability and inclination more like or equal, able to do, apt to effect the same things, could hardly be, for then all men would be competitors and strugglers for the same thing, and so none would easily obtain or peacefully enjoy it. Now, since it is plainly best for man to live thus in society, many great benefits thence accruing to him, security to his life, safe enjoying the fruits of his industry, much ease by mutual assistance, much delight in conversation, all that civil people enjoy of convenience beyond barbarians and savages, or indeed above beasts, that men are so disposed and suited thereto, is an argument of mighty wisdom and great goodness in that cause from whence all this proceeded, and such a cause is God. Thus, from the constitution of societies we may collect a provident care over human affairs. The same also may be reasonably deduced from the preservation of them. For although man be inclined unto and fitted for society, yet being an agent very free and loose in his actions, acting contingently, and without necessary subjection to any settled law or rule, as do other things in nature, no ordinary banks will constantly retain him in due place and order, so that the course of affairs, perverted by some men's irregular wills and passions, would run into great confusion, did not a wise care also continually govern things, seasonably interposing its hand, and thereby upholding, retaining, establishing them in order, or reducing them thereinto. Did not a superintendent power restrain the fierceness of tyrants, the ambition of grandees, the greediness of oppressors, the wildness and precipitancy of factious multitudes? Did not God sometime, break the arm of the wicked, or, as Job speaks, pour contempt upon princes, and, weaken the strength of the mighty, if he that, stilleth the noise of the seas, did not also, repress the tumults of the people, Indeed, as in nature it is wisely provided that tigers, wolves, and foxes upon the earth, that kites in the air, and sharks in the sea, shall not so multiply and abound, but that many tame and gentle creatures shall abide there by them, so among men, that, among divers fierce, ravenous, crafty, and mischievous men, so many poor, simple, and harmless people do make a shift to live here in competent safety, liberty, ease, and comfort, doth argue his especial overwatching care and governance, who, as we are, in conformity to experience, taught by sacred Scripture, hath an especial regard unto the poor and unto the meek, providing for them and protecting them. I might subjoin those significations of providence which the general connection of mankind doth afford, things being so ordered that several nations and societies shall be prompted, by need or by advantage mutual, to maintain correspondence and commerce with each other, under common laws and compacts, that so there should become a kind of union and harmony even among the several parts and elements, as it were, of the human world. I might consider the benefit that arises, as in the natural world from contrary qualities and motions, so, in the human world, even from wars and contentions, how those rouse men from sloth, brush away divers vices, ferment and purge things into a better condition. But I will not strive to be so minute and subtle. Here I shall conclude these sorts of argumentation, inferring the existence of God from the common effects obvious to our sense and experience, either in the greater world of nature or lesser world of man, by which God doth continually, in a still, though very audible voice, whisper this great truth into our ears. There be other sort of effects, more rare and extraordinary, which go above or against both those streams of natural and human things, where my God doth more loudly, as it were, and expressly proclaim his being and providence, the consideration of which I shall reserve to another time. Grant, we beseech thee, Almighty God, that the words which we have heard this day with our outward ears may, through thy grace, be so grafted inwardly in our hearts that they may bring forth in us the fruit of good living, to the honour and praise of thy name, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.